I'm Teresa Bailey, host of In the Money. On today's show, we're talking about financial advice for entrepreneurs and those contemplating starting their own business. According to the U.S. Small Business Association, as of 2016, there were 28.8 million companies in the United States that were defined as being a small business, which means having less than 500 employees. Additionally, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 50% of the businesses starting out will survive more than 5 years. Only 1/3 will survive more than 10 years. With so many Americans scratching the entrepreneurial itch, the success of small business owner is vital to our nation and to our communities. Whether you are swimming in these statistics and contemplating starting your own business, or you're running a successful venture and unsure when to sell or retire, pulling together a team of advisors can bring clarity to your financial life and help you stay in the money. Joining us today is David Waddell, President and CEO of Waddell Associates. David's going to share with us his thoughts on the art of advising the entrepreneur. Stay tuned as we sit down to chat with David Waddell.
You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Today we're discussing advice to keep an entrepreneur in the money. Joining us is David Waddell with Waddell Associates. Thank you for being here with us today, David.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're going to talk about entrepreneurs, but before we get started, tell us a little bit about you and what you do every day.
So Waddell Associates is a wealth strategies firm. So we work with clients on a variety of issues, much like starting a business, but principally setting up strategies to help them make sure the kids are educated, get them safely towards retirement, help with aging parents. Is a myriad of things that as financial planners we get involved in, and it's therefore a very dimensional practice. A lot of what we do also is delivering the rates of return called for by the financial plan. So there's a lot of time spent on the investment management side trying to help navigate these complicated markets. So it's a fusion of investment management, financial planning, and a whole lot of communication.
So with an entrepreneur, somebody who arguably has a very different mindset, a lot of them have been called unemployable. What is your take on sort of the different animal that the entrepreneur can be, or can they?
I think there's a spectrum of entrepreneurship, if you will. There are those that are entrepreneurial within businesses. I would say that you're probably that way. And they can add a lot of value within a business, and they can get their soul fed while still having a safety net beneath them. Entrepreneurs that really want absolutely no safety net are somewhat sick in the head. Okay. They tend to be either, pressed by some sort of challenge that they feel is insurmountable that they have to conquer, or they just are unwilling to work for other people. I mean, they're a strange but wonderful species, and they lead us forward in communities and in businesses, but they are a complicated species.
So they bring benefit to the community. What are the downfalls? What keeps them up at night? What can go wrong in the life of an entrepreneur?
Entrepreneurs by nature are a little bit ADHD, probably. And I know because I am one, so if anybody's taking offense at this, I'm speaking to myself. There are really high highs and there are really low lows. And so there are moments when you feel like, you know what, I can do anything and I've completely got this market figured out and I'm the star of the market. And then there are other moments in the middle of the night where you're a total failure or you're a fraud. So for the entrepreneur, it's a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. I would say for the spouse or for the close friends of an entrepreneur, it's even more of a roller coaster. But with financial advice and an entrepreneur, you kind of have to get into their headspace a little bit, and be able to tailor the method of communication to be specific to what they're getting twisted up about, and sometimes you have to figure that out for them. So it requires not only a financial planning degree, but also a psychology degree.
Oh, I can imagine. So you mentioned 3 different sections in your intro, sort of the investment side, the financial planning, and then communication. So from what I understand, you just said you maybe have to change your communication strategy with an entrepreneur and speak a different language or a different method?
I think entrepreneurs are very bottom line focused. And so they want to know that you're doing all the work, right? But they really just want the result, right? To tell them exactly what it is that they're seeking. If they're seeking a number, give them the number. And then you have to walk back through the specifics to the point where they feel like, okay, that's probably the right number, right? But you don't know how far back you have to go. With other clients, it's often A to Z, right? Where it's a cumulative function of, okay, here's how much money you have, here's how long we're trying to project, and here's the rate of return, et cetera. And so it's this cumulative build. With entrepreneurs, it's the end in mind, and then kind of work backwards. So you almost have to invert, in my mind, the way that you communicate facts and figures with an entrepreneur.
How would you compare the certainty of a traditional financial planning relationship where you're planning for retirement or education with the uncertainty of all the variables that come with starting a business, running a business, and then eventually getting out of a business?
That gets complicated, but that's what makes it so much fun for a financial advisor. I think specifically about an entrepreneur we work with in Nashville. And they were very successful, sold a business, and were trying to figure out what to do next. And so with that individual, we told them, you don't have enough money necessarily to just never go to work again. So here's the amount of money you have to make this work. And translating that even further, they were thinking about going into real estate, here's how many properties you have to turn or what that looks like. And so with an entrepreneur, you can sort of point at a goal, and if they're successful, they'll exceed it. So that makes the financial planning different too, because the strategies become milestones they can hit. Whereas with somebody with more steady state current income, you can just remind them whether they're on course or not. With the entrepreneur, you almost have to leave the breadcrumbs out a little bit to help them define a course, because they're not going to follow a prescripted course just because you said so.
So traditionally, how many times will an entrepreneur start a business? One before that the big successful business, or once they do it one time, do you find that they continue to start and innovate businesses?
A true entrepreneur is constantly starting businesses. They're serial entrepreneurs. Even in my own life, and I was thinking about that as we were coming in, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, there are probably a half dozen of these things that have percolated up, some that have worked, some that haven't. So you hear a lot, I think, about the businesses that succeed that an entrepreneur has founded. You don't hear nearly as much as those that have failed, but I assure you there's a graveyard littered with failures around every entrepreneur, and that's not a problem, right? It's not a disgrace to fail. It's just part of the process. You just keep working at it. So
when you get that call, sorry to interrupt you, when you
please.
get that call that one of them has failed, what is your role as their advisor, as their financial person?
That's complicated. My hope is that we have established sort of the risk parameters ahead of the venture, right? So is this an all-in venture, right? Are we putting all of our financial resources into this? Are we pulling in all of our friends and family? Is this an all-in venture? If it is, let's understand that on the front end. Here are the consequences, and then let's keep that resume up to speed, because we may have to go back to the job market quickly. In many instances, we just define how much the risk budget is, right? So if you have a liquidity event, you want to go into business again, okay, here's your budget, right? So find a business that fits within this so that we don't mess up the win that we had last time.
I imagine there's a lot involved with getting that call.
The communication with an entrepreneur is a nuanced and special experience.
We have to take a short break, and we'll be back in a moment with David. Stay with us.
We'd do anything for kids. Yet 1 in 6 children in the U.S. struggle with hunger. Help end childhood hunger near you. Learn how at feedingamerica.org.
So there you are, shuffling through a stack of resumes and you come to mine. This is it, first impression, my way in. But can my resume show you how I truly stand out? Like that I was studying, going to night school while working 2 jobs just to help my parents pay for groceries. Or being the first one to always step up. No, that's something you just can't put on paper. Look beyond the resume and discover new ways to develop great talent that is dedicated, hardworking, and determined like me.
You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Welcome back to In the Money. If you're just joining us, we're talking about financial tips for the entrepreneur. Today we're joined by David Waddell with Waddell Associates. Thanks again for being here with us today. So when we left off, we were talking about you getting a phone call from a client that's an entrepreneur and one of the businesses has failed. So when you and I discussed doing this interview, we sort of framed it in a way of there's, should I start a business? There's the running of the business, and then there's how do I get out of this business when I retire if something happens to me. So if you have clients who are starting businesses and you're getting called that maybe smaller ones aren't working, sort of how do you walk through with a client whether they should start a business or start another business? What does that sort of look like?
Well, there's some go-to questions, right? First of all, what's the addressable market, right? Are we trying to be Uber? Or are we trying to be a lawn care company, right? Mm-hmm. How big are you really planning on going? From there, it's always a resource question, right? How much will this cost to get this in the air? And by the way, that number actually is 3 times whatever you think it is.
So it's like doing a kitchen renovation.
Yeah.
Like you have a budget and then you can just multiply it.
Kitchen renovations are easier. The bad thing about these spreadsheets that we all build to forecast the business is they don't contemplate how many mistakes you're going to make along the way. So you don't actually have a miscellaneous category for foul-ups, if you will. So it always costs more money than you think. Second of all, it really is a strain on relationships to a certain extent because you need help. You're going to need help from the family. You're going to need help from your friends. So you got to be comfortable that you're embarking on something that's really going to take a village, for lack of a better term. So you've got to have sort of the human resources figured out. You got to have the financial resources figured out. You got to know the addressable market, and then what makes you uniquely qualified to exploit that opportunity. I think one mistake entrepreneurs make is they try and go it alone. It's impossible, right? So, I think about businesses are like symphonies, and usually you have a composer. They're not necessarily the conductor, right? So you got to figure out where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are, and you better put the team together. I would much rather have a strong team than a strong idea.
So that reminds me of a book that I've read. I imagine you've read it as well, E-Myth, where they talk about, if you really love, and you may want to jump in and help me out here, if you really love making the widget and you decide you don't want to work for the guy that you've been working for making the widget, maybe you should go and open your own shop that makes widgets. How does that sort of translate when you speak to somebody who's never started a business before and has always worked for someone? How do you help with that sort of mindset shift, getting the family on board, the behavioral side of it?
I think mission critical to that is if somebody decides they want to step out, if you haven't figured out who your oboe player is and your bassinet player and you don't have the symphony all figured out, you better have the advisors figured out, right? So you're going to need, in my judgment, and it's worth overpaying for these capacities, you need a bulletproof accountant, you need a bulletproof attorney who's, conversant in deal structure, because formation documents matter. Getting leases figures out matters. I mean, small mistakes in the beginning because you went cheap on your advisory team can be magnified to extreme levels, right? Even Facebook is a classic example of that. Those poor Winklevoss, they could have been billionaires and they're only multi-hundred millionaires. But anyway, so having a good financial advisor, and so that's a selfish pitch, but having a great lawyer and a great accountant is critical. And then that whole team can kind of come together and help you think all the way through it. But there's got to be a good amount of scripting and business planning that goes into it before you take a big step like that. Because the alternative cost is if you're in the widget shop, you are making money. And if they've got a 401k, you are saving money, right? You are building towards something. It may not be at a pace you like or with the people you like. But if you jump off of that train to pursue it yourself, you've got the time factor while you're spooling up financially. That's a real, you don't see it, but it's a cost of decision making that has to be apprised.
So do you calculate the loss of retirement benefit, the loss of earned income, health care coverage, all of that? Is that part of the
I
sort of
think
analysis?
People think too simply about compensation. They think, what's my salary and what's my 401k balance? They don't think about all the employee benefits and the employment cost index. If you break it down, the benefits are like 30% of your total comp structure, in a normal business. So it's a very fat piece of your compensation that you don't think about. But yeah, if you're an entrepreneur, you got to figure out how to get the health care, the dental care, and all that stuff. And individuals pay for a family, $27,000 is the rack rate for health insurance, et cetera. So it's not a small consideration.
Very costly, absolutely. So what do you feel like is sort of the moment when an entrepreneur knows, this is what I want to do, I'm going to do this?
Because they're so passionate about it, they can't think about anything else. There is a problem that they are going to solve, and they got it all sorted out. Now they don't, but they've got the appropriate enthusiasm for it, which gets them in the game. And then they can figure it out and redirect, and you bump into walls and you go around walls. An ego-driven, arrogant entrepreneur, not willing to adapt, will fail, right? So you may think you got the perfect, juice figured out, but by the time you finish the enterprise, you may be making beer. So you just got to figure out how to adjust. But you better have a belly full of steam, because it's 24/7. You're not going to make as much money as you think, probably initially. Your financial plans are all going to be squirrely. The people you thought would be really reliable are less, and the people that aren't. It's a huge adventure, right? But you got to have the gut strength to really go through that adventure. And those that do persevere. You said 50% fail within the first 5 years, but that means 50% succeed, right? And those numbers get even better if you have a really good partner. So find a good partner, take the leap, and find some support, which we can talk about too.
So support, actually, when the business is running, very quickly, what is your role when things are going good and they're not ready to get rid of the business, but it's happened and now it's going?
Right, so once it's a going concern, we move away from that formation, coaching sort of advice to, okay, how do we monetize this, right? If it's a service business, do you have a high capacity to save? What's the best retirement structure? Because you can get pretty artistic with that. If it's a product-based business, okay, we're probably not going to take much out of the business, so we're not going to be building up assets outside the business. We're going to build them up inside the business. What do we have to sell that business for to make your plan work?
Okay, pause right there. We'll come back in a minute. We have to take another short break. We'll be right back with David.
Oh, emojis! I thought the conversation just got dumber.
Ugh, internet trolls, just ignore them.
I like you just the way you are.
I believe in you!
She's a hugger. Give her a squeeze.
Help up the hand!
Ah, there you go.
Thanks, mate.
You're killing it, Jane!
Of all the things you've done with your bike, donating it to Goodwill may be the most incredible of all. Your donations help fund job placement and training for people in your community, which means your stuff can be more powerful than you think. Goodwill. Donate stuff, create jobs.
You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Welcome back to In the Money. We're talking through financial and business decisions for entrepreneurs with David Waddell. Thanks again for being here with us today, David. And when we left off, we were talking about the role that you play when a business has been started, it's successful, and it's up and going. So finish your thoughts on that. Are you just at that point consultant? And
I think we're accountability partners at that point. You know, here's what we said we were going to save a year. Are we on track for that? Or we know that this is the exit value we have to achieve. Are we on track for that? Can that happen this year? Can it happen next year? Where are we in the business cycle? So once it's in the going concern status, it becomes, you know, a management activity both for the entrepreneur, which they typically don't like, but also for the financial advisor to make sure everything's on course. So it's less sort of, it takes less motive power than starting the business, and also winding it down takes a lot of motive power, but that accountability matters. And so we end up being the accountability partner.
Interesting. So when they're sort of in that run phase, are they working more in the business at that point or working on the business?
Well, that's a trap, right? It's almost impossible to do both. And so you have to figure out how to put processes together or get coaches involved, or again, having a good partner. I mean, it's great if you have an outside cat and an inside cat. So if the business is scaling, though, then the hiring decisions become mission critical. And so sometimes we can be useful. You know, it's not, again, a financial planning, it's more of an HR sort of craftsmanship. But, you know, who do you need that you don't have, and how do you find them? And businesses are about networks, you know. So another thing that we end up, I think, doing a lot is helping people find resources beyond their current network.
So tell me a little bit about those resources. Who do you, or are you talking about books or people in the community, other professionals?
I mean, you know, we're blessed to be financial advisors to a host of wonderful people, right? And those people can be helpful. You know, I mean, I'm having an issue today where we've got an entrepreneur who's got a spouse that's pretty ill, and we had to light up a network to figure out how to navigate Mayo. I mean, you never know. But to the extent that we've built a family around our business, at least, it's how do we utilize that to help somebody? So we'll go through networks to help people with capital connections, you know, connect people with mentors. Mentors are mission critical to entrepreneurs. Who do we know who's been there, done that, and can we put you in contact with them? So, you know, networks are very important. At least connecting with an advisory firm like W&A gives you access to a pretty big network.
Interesting. So in the last few minutes of the show, what I do want to cover is possibly what's the biggest piece of it. You have a successful business, or you have a moment where you're a bored entrepreneur and you just don't want to run this business anymore, or you're at the age where you need to retire or move on to something else. Well, when do those conversations normally begin to happen in the life cycle of the business, and what do those conversations look like as an advisor from your point of view?
Serial entrepreneurs will take a bid when they get bored with the business or the bid is bigger than they expect, right?
Interesting.
For those that are really running small businesses, and maybe they're scale-ups, not startups, so they're playing the role of an entrepreneur, but they're really kind of an operator, then it becomes more of a financial planning conversation. They just sort of get tired. And the question becomes, you know, David, when can I stop doing this? Or when should I sell this business? I'm assuming this will go on TV soon, right? Because right now, private equity, venture capital are paying the highest multiples they've ever paid for businesses. So if you're getting to the point where you're kind of exhausted and you don't want to stick around for another 5 to 7 years, now's the time.
So it's a seller's market
Absolutely.
for small business.
Yes.
Okay. So how do you walk someone through what their number is? You know, how much they should want for their business?
I see this as a mistake often. So somebody will say, wow, somebody just offered me $1 million for my business, I'm going to sell. That's wrong. So often people will get a number in their head. They'll feel like, you know, I can hit my number, but do you really know what your number is? Because your number is how much does it cost to be you? So just to do some raw back of the envelope math, if it costs $100,000 to be you, you got to sell the business for $3 million, right? And that's gross. You got to pay your tax. You got to pay your team. And then you've got the carrying costs going forward.
You kind of sound like a bubble burster then at that point. I mean, is it a lot of reality check?
I just think you got to go into it eyes wide open, right? Because it's okay to fail, right? But being surprised might not be okay. So as long as we can sort of reveal the truth of the experience, and like I said, 50% are successful within that first 5 years, then we've done our job. It's up to the entrepreneur or the entrepreneur in waiting to decide they want to pursue it take the risk on. We just lay it out for them and then help them as much as we can.
So someone who's watching the show today and they're on the verge, they're thinking about a startup or jumping into a business locally here or nationally, whichever, what resources do they have?
So I have a fantasy for our area, and that's that within 10 years we'll have 1,000 entrepreneurs running around, right? To fund that fantasy, we're out trying to raise for an organization that you can read about online called the EPICENTER $100 million, okay? Wow. 40 million of that will be direct capital infusions to businesses of merit. 40 million of that will be programs that surround the entrepreneur to help make them as successful as they can, and 20 million will be overhead for the organization. That's a 10-year plan. Where Memphis lacks resources, I think, is the ability to find ready funding for entrepreneurs with ideas of merit. So we're working hard to try and plug that gap. However, once those resources are acquired, you still got to have the support network, the coaching, the training, the networks, et cetera. So we're trying to formalize that and institutionalize it within the EPICENTER here in Memphis.
So it would become sort of a think tank of peers where you could go and sort of have that community and share those ideas.
Yes, because in your idea, let's say my idea fails and your idea works and I still want to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to come on your team. So it might be 300 businesses, but if it's 1,000 entrepreneurs, they'll find a way.
That's fascinating. So where again can folks find out more information about that?
So if they Google on the interweb EPICENTER Memphis, they'll find all of this information.
All right, so wrapping up today, what are the top 3 things that you would tell an entrepreneur who is considering starting an adventure?
Take feedback, right? Be bold, but utilize the resources around you to get feedback. And as one of an entrepreneur I know well taught me one day, he said, David, at any given moment, you're the average of the 5 people you're spending your time with. So if you're getting ready to launch a business, who are the 5 people that you're going to surround yourself with to make sure not only you make the right decision, but that your business ends up being successful after you launch?
So surround yourself with the right people. Take feedback. So that's tricky though. If somebody in your world tells you that your idea isn't awesome, at what point you have to have conviction, right? That your idea is amazing.
You better have the motive power to push through. And just because your idea isn't awesome doesn't mean it can't be tweaked to be awesome. Right? Here's what I see that I didn't know, or if my idea is not awesome and I want to be in this space, who's been there, done that, who can? So it becomes a journey. You don't have the answer day one. In fact, I'm not sure you ever really get the answer, but it is going to create a lot of twists and turns in the road. You got to be adaptable, but if you got the motive power, you can push through.
Got it. So be open to the feedback, have the right team.
Correct.
All right. Thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate it.
I'm willing to go another half hour if you like.
I don't think we have the time for that. Today we discussed that advice for the entrepreneurial balance sheet can be more art than science. It's important to have a knowledgeable team of advisors who can not only understand the math behind the decisions of a small business owner, but also the mindset of one. That's all the time we have today. Thanks to David Waddell of Waddell Associates, and thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more shows, follow us on YouTube or Facebook at Germantown Municipal Television. You can also visit our website at gmtvonline.org. Each person's financial situation is unique. Before making any decisions, please speak to a financial professional to see if our discussions today are in your best interest. We'll see you when In the Money returns next season. I'm Teresa Bailey, and now you are in the money.